Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. And sorry, this is a little bit late. We had our a little issue with our guest that was meant to come on Thursday to preview this Maryland game, but that got postponed. So we are going to do a little bit differently this week, where, of course, I'll be talking about the Maryland game, but since this is posting on late Friday evening, I'm also going to do a little more recruiting than I normally would in an episode to preview a game and talk about the last game for Virginia. And again, if you like what you're hearing and you like our coverage on Wahoo's 24/7, you can find our content on Wahoo's 24/7, but also here on YouTube by clicking on our channel and liking the channel and this video, and also following us wherever you listen to our podcast. We are also currently running a 60% off sale, so it works out to just under $45 for the entire year, and also less than $4 a month for all your recruiting content. And with Virginia having one of the biggest recruiting weekends on their schedule this fall, this Saturday, it's a good time to head over to Wahoo's 24/7, especially with Virginia basketball also hosting a very important visitor. So let's start with recruiting, and then we'll go on to the actual football for the Cavaliers. But kudos to Virginia realizing that they can work off this momentum not only on the field but also on the recruiting trail. And actually, just a quick note: if you're watching this on YouTube, there's no video this week. It is just audio because we are currently in the middle of a construction zone in my house as we rebuild our office. If you are a parent, you understand the big milestone when your dining room goes from being a playroom to being your new office. And that's where we are now, since my kids are now at an age where I can trust them, well, sort of trust them, moving up to the upstairs office where they can play. But anyway, so recruiting. Yes, this is going to be a big recruiting weekend for Virginia. We've been previewing it all week on Wahoo's 24/7, kind of showing which players are expected to visit. And it's a very good list. If you're on Wahoo's 24/7, we had the running list pinned up there, but we also had a Cavs Confidential posted in the afternoon on Friday. So when you look at the visitor list, obviously one of the big visitors coming on grounds is a top 247 wide receiver, Connor Salmon. He is from Woodgrove High School in Purcellville, Virginia. He is a 4-star. He is the 7th best player in the state, according to 24/7, in the 2026 class. He has visited Virginia a number of times and is certainly one that is good to keep coming on grounds. Virginia has had some successful wide receivers lately in the last 2 years. Obviously, Malik Washington, who's now with the Dolphins, but also Malachi Fields in the opening 2 games. And then transfers like Trell Harris performing well is also a reason why these kids are seeing Virginia as a good landing spot if you're a wide receiver. So Connor Salmon coming to Virginia is obviously a good sign for the Cavaliers, but he's not the only in-state player coming. Brady Sakowitz, an offensive lineman from Trinity Episcopal in Richmond, Virginia. He's returning to Virginia. He actually visited for the opener against Richmond, but because of the rain delay, he had to leave early. So this is a guy who has come to Virginia often. This is the 3rd time since the summer. He picked up an offer from Terry Heffernan after that recruiting camp over the summer. And this is a guy who loves Virginia, loves Terry Heffernan. I think Virginia Tech is in it as well, but Virginia doing a great job of getting him on grounds 3 times since June. And he also visited for the spring game where he actually got the offer. Then he came and camped in the summer. So again, good get for Virginia. They're also hosting a number of guys that they just recently offered, like cornerback Jaziel Hart from Roanoke, Virginia, a Northcross athlete. They also have Eli Hamrick, quarterback out of North Carolina. He tweeted out that he will be there. He's not the only quarterback that will be there. Virginia's latest quarterback offeree, Terry Walker, will also be on ground. So again, a lot of good guys expected. I expect also some offers to be given out for some of these guys who are visiting. Guys like, offensive lineman Gregory Maddox from the state of Maryland. He is one guy that will be there. And obviously, Virginia is doing a good job of getting some 2027 kids on grounds too, like top 100 edge rusher Chris Whitehead. He's a 4-star in that class. He's the #1 player currently in the state of Virginia and number 7 edge rusher in the whole nation. So a good guy to get on grounds, especially this early. So again, Virginia is using their 2-0 start, having a rivalry game at home against Maryland, because although Maryland might not be their rival in the ACC, they're still the geographical rival when you consider who is Virginia is fighting for. Obviously, you look at Messiah Delhomme in the 2025 class choosing Maryland over Virginia. There's some that believe that he possibly will visit this weekend as well on ground. So again, Maryland is someone that they're head-to-head fighting on the recruiting trail. Getting a win over them doesn't guarantee that they'll win on the recruiting trail, but it certainly shows where the program is headed if you win against Maryland. So again, Virginia doing a good job of getting those guys and hyping up a big recruiting weekend when your on the field performance is doing well. And we're talking about that in just a little bit because Tony Bennett is also having a big weekend. So we're going to take a quick basketball break and then we'll go to football in the second half. But yes, so this is a guy that if you've been following Virginia basketball, I feel like this name has been in your mouth probably a few times in the last few years, and that's Chance Mallory. So Chance Mallory is from Stab, St. Anne's Bailfield, obviously very connected to the Virginia program. The coach's sons have played there. Obviously, if you go in the women's program, they've also have connections to Stab as well. So Chance Mallory is visiting this weekend. There was a time where it didn't feel like Chance Mallory would go to UVA. It felt like Virginia obviously was making him a priority. You want to keep those kids home, but it felt like it was a long shot. Although he was an in-state kid, or honestly, in-city kid. But things started to turn probably around the spring. That's when I first started hearing and we first started noting on Wahoo's 24/7 that things started trending differently. Well, he's on grounds this weekend, and that's going to be key for Virginia. He visited Virginia Tech last weekend, and then he also has other visits coming up to Clemson, Villanova, Tennessee, and Miami. But I think Virginia is in a good spot so far for Virginia, but they only have one guard position open. So we'll be curious to see how far or how long they will wait for Chance Mallory to decide. But again, Virginia is in a better spot for him than they were just a few months ago. So that is on Chance Mallory. He's visiting. Nate Ament is not visiting this weekend, or at least that's what I've heard. When I'm recording this podcast, he was set to visit probably around last month. That's when he first initially set that visit, but then he wanted to slow things down and he started to move visits along. It could happen in October, but again, Virginia probably doesn't want to wait that long for that visit. So that's why he's not on the visitor list. Obviously, Virginia hosted 4-star Cam Ward last weekend. He's going to visit Kansas State this weekend. His recruitment will probably end around November, December. Virginia feels pretty good about him. And Cam Ward has told Deshaun London, who talked to Cam Ward, and that interview is up on Wahoo's 24/7, that he liked his Virginia visit. And people around them say that Virginia did a stellar job on that visit, and it was probably one of their top visit during his recruitment so far. So that is this kind of the quick update on recruiting. We're going to be talking to all these visitors from Chance Mallory and basketball and all those football visitors over the course of the next few days. So if you are a recruiting aficionado, if you like recruiting, take advantage of our 6% off sale, since we're going to be updating a lot of these guys. With Virginia having almost a full class in 2025, although they would obviously with the 105 scholarship number that could possibly shake things up. Virginia hasn't kind of settled on how their scholarship number is going to be allotted, if they're going to stick with 85. It's a lot of things are up in the air, but they have that potential that could change things. Maybe that opens up a little bit with the 2025 class. But right now it feels like they were kind of focusing on the transfer portal here for the next kind of step there in that class, and kind of waiting for the right pieces. But they're active in 2026, active in 2027. New offers are going out in 2026 quite a bit here. So we're kind of moving a little bit towards that on Wahoo's 24/7 as well, kind of building out our board of some of the key guys. Terry Walker is that quarterback that's visiting. He's very high on Virginia's board, but also Eli is the other quarterback that's visiting. He's also pretty high on the board as well. So again, we'll have all that coverage on Wahoo's 24/7. And we're going to take a quick break here. And then on the way back, we're going to actually talk some football, because Virginia is coming in 2-0 for the first time in Tony Elliott's tenure at Virginia. Can they make it 3-0? We'll talk about it after the break. Virginia football is 2-0 for the first time under Tony Elliott, but they look to go to 3-0 for the first time since the 2019 season and only for the fourth time in the last 25 years on Saturday. And they'll hope to do that against arch rival Maryland at Scott Stadium with an 8 p.m. kickoff. So before we get to talk about Maryland, let's talk about the game against Wake Forest because that was a great game for Virginia. Not because it was pretty, not because it didn't give you heart palpitations, but because it showed a team that was fighting to win, a team that just wanted it more. And I said this on Twitter. I said this when I do my rewatches on Monday. I tend to rewatch the game on Monday and I start a new thread. It takes me, instead of watching it live, I get to watch back on tape and see a couple of plays that I might miss when you're watching it from the press box. And one thing that, you missed live is you saw the fight that Antonio Clary had in that one of the last defensive possessions that kind of sealed the win, right? Malcolm Green forced that fumble, but then I didn't realize that Wake Forest, the receiver actually had his hand on the ball. It was Antonio Clary. He came in, put his hand on the ball and yanked it and wrestled it away and recovered that ball. So it looked like Virginia had lost that recovery, but Antonio Clary just wanted that ball more. And at the end, it was Virginia that wanted that win more. And that fight was so different than the Virginia teams we saw last year in those close games. And I think when you look at the difference, you can say that Anthony Colandrea looks more mature out there, which is true. You can say that the offense, there's some things that are clicking better. You can say that the offensive line, yes, there were some times where they could have maybe pushed a little bit more forward so you get more gaps in the running game. But at the end of the day, it's that fight that was different for Virginia. I don't think this team, I don't think last year's team would have won this game against Wake Forest coming down the way they did twice, because granted, they didn't take the lead for the first, they only took the first time lead in that fourth quarter, but they came back in that first half. They just couldn't get over the hump. And then obviously they had that bad third quarter where things just seemingly to go Wake Forest way. The Deacons were able to take a lot off that clock, and Virginia wasn't able to put together a drive. They weren't able to sustain a drive. And then it looked like Wake Forest kind of sealed the win until Anthony Colandrea was able to lead a very nice drive with a couple throws to Trell Harris, and Xavier Brown kind of woke up a little bit the offense with his runs that kind of sparked things up a little bit, moving the chain slowly, able to kind of create some momentum and sustain drives, which made the difference, right? And then on defense, they were able to blitz a little bit more. They were sending guys more. They got to the quarterback 6 times, able to sack him, which is, 6 sacks in one game while they had 11 sacks last year, shows tremendous improvement. So again, if you saw my 5 takeaways, that was one of them, was that fight. And I think Antonio Clary's play kind of summed it up. Yes, Anthony Colandrea's play and how he came back and led this team and had that fire in the sidelines, how he matured a little bit and knew when to slide and when he walk away. But at the same time, he's still learning. And I think that's the only thing that we're still seeing. There's still a room for this team to grow. Anthony Colandrea is still entering his second season. But there's a lot of good things to see. Also on the offensive line, when you look at the O-line, yes, there's a lot of returners, but then you look at a guy like Jack Whitmer, who's only having his second career start at left tackle. He's starting for Mikhail Boley, who's been hurt and has been day to day. I don't expect him to play against Maryland because even if he does come in for a few snaps, his conditioning isn't quite there yet. So it's going to take a little while for Mikhail Boley to get a lot of snaps. So Jack Whitmer has come in and he's done a great job. Pro Football Focus has graded him pretty high for the last 2 games here, and he's done a good job. And he was tested against Wake Forest. He'll be tested again against a Big Ten defensive line coming up here against the Terps. But Jack Whitmer has given Anthony Colandrea time, and to be fair, the O-line has given him quite enough time to pass protect. Now in the run game, would they want more push and more holes created? Yes. But again, it's things are moving in the right direction for Virginia. So that is good for UVA and what they can accomplish moving forward. But it was good to see that Virginia has developed some depth at that O line, which is a question mark when you're coming into the season. Yes, they had the same starting five. Well, obviously Mikhail Ball is not playing now, but you always wondered how good are their 6, 7, and 8, because generally you play the five guys, right? You generally don't want to switch your O line, but you always wonder how the next guys were coming up. And Jack Whitmer, we have a feature up on Wahoo's 24/7 that we had the pleasure of talking to Jack, but also his father, Rich Whitmer, and also obviously the coaches about his progression over the last 18 months and his decision to move from tight end to offensive line. That was a commitment by him. I mean, he had to switch his diet. He was eating 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day, which I don't know how you can do that, but he managed to eat that much food. But once you gain the weight, and his dad said he gained an incredible amount of weight in just about 3, 4 months. I think it was 30 pounds, he said, if I remember correctly. And then once you gain the weight, you have to add strength, because you can gain weight. That doesn't happen. That doesn't help you if it's not good weight. So you have to convert that weight into strength. And then when you're doing strength training, if sometimes you might lose weight. And so still have to maintain your calorie intake. You're still working on your strength. And he's also learning a new position. So there's a lot of stuff that was kind of thrown at Jack Whitmer. He did a good job. During the spring is where Terry Heffernan saw the kind of changes coming up for him. And then once the fall camp started, that's when things really turned up. Heffernan said that, he placed the depth chart up on the wall in the O-line meeting, and Jack Whitmer was number 3 on the depth chart. And then as the as a fall camp went, he got more opportunities and he moved up, and Mikhail Boley wasn't able to practice. So there's suddenly a fight in who can possibly at left tackle. And all of a sudden Jack Whitmer is starting on the first week, and it was all things were just clicking at the right time from him. So again, so I think Virginia did a good job of creating depth there, and I'm curious to see how he does against a Big Ten defensive line. The other takeaway, obviously, at Wake Forest was Malachi Fields. He's obviously a guy that we knew was talented. He's had 2 career over 100-yard receiving, his first 2 catching the ball over 100 yards. But to be fair to him, he also had Malik Washington last year on the offense. So Malik was definitely going to get more of those touches. But this year, with him there and getting those touches, it certainly is showing what type of weapon he is. Not only is he a guy that can make those big plays, he's also going to draw those pass interference calls. And he's going to be certainly a weapon on the perimeter. Trail Harris is another one that it was kind of my underrated player coming into the season. He's also providing a very good target for Anthony Calandria. And then when you add Virginia having a tight end in Tyler Neville, he also had a good game, 2 touchdowns for Virginia. It's been almost 20 years since a tight end had 2 touchdowns in a half, not mention a game for Virginia. So Virginia having a tight end for the first time, maybe they'll be back to the tight end U acronym. So, but yeah, having Tyler Neville has shown that this offense has a lot of weapons. Now, the key for the offense moving forward, and when you watch the game, is can they sustain drives? Because right now, they're not boom or bust, but at the same time, they can do the explosive plays, right? And you want those explosive plays, but you also want the ability to get those dirty yards, like Des Kitchings would say. You want to get those 2-3 yards. You want to get those 4 yards, which they showed with Xavier Brown towards that fourth quarter. You want to have those north runs, right? You want to move forward. You don't want to work too much on the sideways runs, kind of running 9-10 yards to just get 2 yards. So Virginia is just trying to get and sustain those drives, because you don't want your defense out there so much. You don't want to, if you score in like 45 seconds or like a minute, then your defense is right back out there, which kind of what you remember from the Brennan Armstrong days with Bronco Mendenhall. It's not quite that, but you still want to sustain drives, right? You still want to keep yourself on the field as much as possible, build that momentum, and then go and convert on your third downs, which Virginia is struggling. And if you look at that game, a lot of times is because they were playing behind the chains. They were going 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6. They were already going in long situations. If you chip at that, it's much easier to convert and put yourself in a 4-down territory. So that is something definitely that Virginia needs to improve. And obviously, Anthony Calandra clearing up takeaways. He had two turnovers, two picks. The first one, to be fair, it was a tipped ball. When you look back at replay, you saw Tyler Neville up the middle. He was wide open, but again, a tip pass, you can kind of go, all right, that was a little bit of unluckiness there too. The second pick was honestly that was one that you probably would take back. He was again, it's a kind of a balance when you have a talent like Anthony Calandra, you're gonna get some of those risks. I think Des Kitching said it right. You're gonna have the oh wow moments, but you got to stop the oh crap moments or the moments that kind of get you into trouble. So you had an oh wow moments a couple of times. But then you had the oh crap moment. So it's just about balancing that. But Anthony Calandra has definitely shown improvement there. And then there's a couple errors. There was penalties that negated a big yardage that like that penalty against Fields that negated that Tyler Neville huge gain that had Virginia past midfield toward in the second half. And then there's obviously the Terrell Harris drop. So there's a couple of mistakes like that that Virginia can clean up and have those missed opportunities. Last year, those missed opportunities cost them games. This year, they wasn't quite there. They were able to get that Wake Forest win, which mentally I think is a big win for them. So now they're going to go against Maryland. So as far as injuries, Mikhail Boley is still day to day. Cam Robinson, I would consider a day to day. As just from hearing like where his status is and what's he doing in practice. He was limited early on this week. Still working on seeing if he can play. And also you have to kind of debate if you want him to play. Obviously, it's against Maryland. It's a big game. Virginia understands how the schedule is laid out. So that's going to be determined on game day as far as last time that we were able to hear. And then Corey Thomas is cleared. He had an injury to his midsection, but he's expected to play. So those were the kind of like the main injuries coming out of that game for UVA as far as right now. And for Maryland, this is going to be a tough challenge for the Cavaliers. Like I mentioned I think a few minutes ago when we were just talking about what Virginia did against Wake Forest, having a Big Ten offensive line, defensive line is more physical. So Virginia against Wake Forest, the D line, although they were able to amass 6 sacks, a lot of those came from the second and third level of your defense. Obviously, Jonas Sanker did a good job. James Jackson, Trey McDonald, a lot of those sacks came from there. Obviously, Chico Bennett did get 1 sack up front. But from watching the replay, it was hard. The Wake Forest offense, it's hard to judge a little bit how the defense did because the dynamic of the game changed when they started blitzing. But one thing I noticed is the defense doesn't shed their blocks quick enough. And and again, a lot of it is kind of grain of salt because of what offense they were playing up against. So this is something that I'm curious to see against a Maryland offensive line that quite frankly still has some question marks on them. Yes, they're bigger because they're Big Ten guys, but I still feel like Maryland does have a lot of questions when it comes to that offensive line. They haven't been able to run the ball effectively yet. And I think that's mostly due to their O-line play. So I think the defensive line does have an opportunity there to kind of get the pressure to Maryland's quarterback. And they would want to because right now, Maryland's big strength is kind of a copy of Virginia's main strength. I mean, they will want to get their wide receiver, which is one of the best wide receivers in the nation right now. They would want to get him isolated to get those one-on-one matches because Virginia did allow a receiver against Wake Forest, Donovan Green, to catch 11 balls for 166 yards. Maryland, they're hoping to kind of have the same type of day with Tay Felton. He had a good day against Michigan State. He had 152 yards for 11 catches. And Felton leads the nation with 330 yards receiving. Billy Edwards against Michigan State completed 26 of his 34 passes, 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, he did throw 1 pick against Michigan State, but obviously this is going to be a game that's potentially a shootout between 2 teams that are quite strong in the air. I mentioned Malachi Fields and what he was able to accomplish against Wake Forest, and not to mention what he was able to accomplish against Richmond. So this is a game that is going to have two teams that have equal strength in the air, and 2 teams, to be fair, don't have that strength on the ground. So I think this game is going to decide who can win those one-on-one matchups in the air. And if you can get the ground game going, you're obviously going to have a balanced attack and you're going to have that slight edge. But I don't see these teams doing that. Maryland only ran 86 total rushing yards on 31 carries against Michigan State. And Michigan State had their own questions coming into the game. So it's I don't see the ground game being such a difference. Now, if Virginia can make it a difference, that obviously is going to be the key for UVA. But again, it's a cliche in football. Whoever wins the trenches wins, and that's going to be a key for Virginia as they move forward in this game. Can the O-line protect Anthony Calandria to give him time to throw the ball to Malachi Fields, who can win those one-on-one battles? Because I feel like Maryland's weaknesses is in that secondary, especially with the second team all Big Ten linebacker that they have in the middle of the field in the box. So that's a key matchup for them. Meanwhile, Maryland is saying the same thing, that they feel they can take advantage of Virginia's cornerbacks and have a one-on-one matchup with Felton. So a key matchups there is going to be those wide receivers on both sides of the ball, on both sides of both teams with that cornerback. So I guess I'm just going to end with my score prediction. Now, if you are subscribed to Wiles 24/7, you have already seen my 5 predictions for this game. And one of them is that I think Virginia is going to win. I chose Virginia 34, Maryland 31. So another nail biter for Virginia. I think being at home, I gave them a little bit of an edge just because you have a home field advantage. I think the crowd is going to be pretty good for this game. Hopefully, looking at the weather, doesn't feel like there's going to be a rain delay. So crossing my fingers there. But I kind of like last week. So if you read my prediction last week for Wake Forest, I also chose Virginia to win. I think I chose 31-28 last week with Virginia winning. I said the reason why I chose Virginia last week was because I gave them the edge under center with Anthony Calandria. And I'm doing that again. I think because you have Anthony Calandria, I'm giving them more of the benefit of doubt because I think Calandria has grown a lot since the last time Virginia and the Terps met. Virginia's offense ranks 39th in FBS in yards per game with 463.5, while Maryland ranks 103rd in yards allowed with 401.5. When you look at what Calandria has been able to do under center and you compare it to last year when these two teams face each other, you compare a freshman quarterback that game and you compare it to the maturity of a sophomore quarterback this year, you give the edge to a Virginia team that's familiar with each other and is familiar playing with a Big Ten team. You also look at Brian Stevens last year was playing his first game at center after not playing that position since high school. And he only played that position, I believe, once when a player was injured and he needed to fill in. So that Maryland game was not only on the road, it was also I think I can't remember exactly where it was in the schedule now because everything was a blur, but I think it was in the first 3 games. I think it was the third game was that Friday night, and it was Anthony Calandria did not think he was going to be playing that year because he thought Tony Muskett was going to be the starter. So he was learning the offense. He was a freshman in hostile territory, so a lot of things going there. And when you're playing from behind, you push for throws that you shouldn't do. That you're pushing for things, which Anthony Calandria has gotten better in. So, and you also look that Brian Stevens was also playing in a brand new position for the first time. So I think Virginia has learned from that. And there's been too many changes on the Maryland side and some questions on the Maryland side. So I think Virginia, so that's a long-winded prediction of Virginia 34, Maryland 31. And I also picked Malachi Fields to win a couple battles because not only do you have Malachi Fields, but you also have Tyler Neville, Xavier Brown, and Trell Harris. So again, I think Virginia is going to win. I think it'll be good for the program to go 3-0, especially when they go back on the road next week at Coastal Carolina, and a much needed bye week will come after that. But that is the episode for this week. It's a little shorter than last week just because I wasn't able to get my guest in this week after the last minute schedule conflict there. But we'll be returning here next week. We'll have all the recruiting coverage from this week going on Wahoo's 24/7. We'll be catching up with all the recruiting visitors. We'll also be catching up with a basketball visitor in Chance Mallory. We'll also be at Scott Stadium, so we have full game coverage from the game against Maryland. And then obviously we'll have pregame coverage looking forward to Coastal Carolina next week. And I also be traveling to Coastal Carolina next week. So I'll have coverage from there as well. So again, if you like what you're hearing and you want to keep in tabs more on the recruiting front, since recruiting's going to be picking up a little bit with football and the early signing day this year, don't forget it is the first week of December, not around Christmas time like it's been the last 2 years. Then join Wahoo's 24/7 while you still have a chance. The 60% sale is on right now, and it will go until midnight on Monday. But for right now, I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7, and I hope you guys have a great weekend and enjoy the game.